In this demonstration, we'll be learning how to create a pop-up menu, which will have a sub-menu popping up, and each of those menu items will be links, in this case, to two different pages within the movie, and the third link will link to an external website. And this will be done using the html5 format. So I've already got a finished file here that I'm going to use to demonstrate, so I think the best thing to do is just hit play movie and run that in the browser and demonstrate. So here's my menu, and the idea is when I mouse over the box with the word menu, the submenu pops up to the right. And I can mouse over any one of these buttons and click it and take me to that link. So right now we are currently on what's called the home page. But if I click here, it takes us to page 2. So I've indicated that just by using these large page labels at the bottom here. And the third one is a web link. And you might have noticed there when I came off the menu that it does retract. In other words, the submenu disappears. So mouse over here, and if we mouse away from that menu on any side, the submenu disappears. So these two link to internal pages, if you will. And this third one, I'll click now. It will pop open a new browser window and link to whatever designated URL you put in. And of course, I put my DGO lessons site here. Okay, and I'm just going to close that tab and back to here. There we go. So that's what we're going to build today. So let me show you the Adobe Animate file, and then we'll start a new one from scratch. Just going to pop open my timeline here. So very basic timeline on the scene 1 level. We've got basically two sets of keyframes, one in frame 1. And let me actually name these layers properly. The bottom layer is for the menu. And it's persistent, meaning it will be there for all the frames in scene 1. The second layer is for my, I'll just call them pages. The third layer is for my frame labels, which we use for navigation. I'm going to go underscore labels. Okay, I'm just going to resave this. And the top layer is for my code, which is called actions. The only code at the scene 1 level, in fact, if I call up my actions panel, and the scene 1 right here is a simple stop command. Again, this is JavaScript that we're working with today. My menu is actually a movie clip. Let me collapse the actions panel for a second and move it over. My menu is actually a movie clip. You can see over here. If I double click it, I get inside of that movie clip, and I have two frames. Basically an on and off, if you will. The first frame is like the off frame. And the idea here is that this is a button. And if I mouse over this button, I've used some code to say, on mouse over, go to and stop frame 2. You'll notice on frame 2, I've got all the submenu buttons, as well as an invisible button. And that's the secret to make the submenu disappear. So the invisible button is kind of like the toggle button. It's like the off switch, if you will. So if we're on here, we're fine. But as soon as we move our cursor over this aqua area, it triggers a button that sends the playhead back to here. So we mouse over this, playhead goes here. We mouse over this green part, and probably the bigger the better for that. It brings us back to frame 1. Okay, and that's kind of the on-off feature. When we are in the submenu page, this is again inside the movie clip called menu, I have 3 more sub buttons here. And they're all programmed to link, or go to rather, a page in scene 1. Or actually these two first are programmed to go to a page in scene 1. So it's like the child sending instructions to the parent, which is scene 1, to move the playhead inside of the parent's timeline. I'll show you the code for that in a minute, but let me talk about this third button here. It's uniquely set up that when I click it inside of the web browser, it will launch a new tab with the link for that. Okay, so these two are internal. This is an external web link. This is like the toggle button, the green area that sends me back to frame 1. So that's the logic, or that's how it's constructed. Okay. So let's look at a bit of the code here. Just going to open this up a bit. So on frame 1, inside of the movie clip called menu, as you see here. I'll click on that. And we do have a stop command so that it pauses until we engage that button with a mouse over. And the mouse over is this bit of code right here. And we're saying, I'll just cut to the chase. We're saying when we mouse over button 01 underscore BTN, it will go to and stop a frame label called menu 2, which is what I've labeled the frame on frame 2 over here, which is where our submenu items reside. Okay, once we're on that frame, there's a new bit of code. As you can see, it's keyframed here. So there's a pocket of code in frame 1, and then this keyframe on frame 2 holds its own set of code. So that green button is called invisible. So I'm saying when we mouse over the invisible button, we go back to frame label menu 1, which happens to be this one here. Going further down, I'll just use one of these as an example here. For the home button, on a mouse click, we're saying go to and stop frame label page 2. But you might notice here the word parent. So that's how the child movie clip can send a message to the parent timeline, which is the scene 1 timeline. And once it gets there, then it looks for this frame label. So I had to put this in manually right here. Okay, we're going to end up using the wizard today to create all this code. So I had to manually come into this code because I wanted to speak to the parent of this timeline, which is the main scene 1 movie timeline, where I happen to have a frame label called page 01, PG01. Okay, so that's the only bit of code at the hand insert was parent dot. Okay, and that goes the same for the next one as well. And then the third button for the web, here is the actual code, but it will all be generated for you using the wizard. Okay, window dot open, and you just put your URL there. The underscore blank, of course, means it will open in a new tab. So at this point, let's just start a new file, and we'll build the new one. I'll keep this one open as a reference, though. And actually, I think I need to save it here. There we go. So let's just start a new file. New. And I'm just going to use the standard small size, but what's very important is that we choose html5 canvas as our platform type. Then click create. Now, I always encourage you to save the file immediately before you start any work. So I'm going to do a save as right now here. And we'll call these our last name and use the lesson number. I'm not sure what lesson this is, but I'm going to guess that it's 07. Just use the appropriate lesson number after your last name, .fla. And I have a folder for this already. I'm actually going to make a new folder though to host this because the HTML5 files do generate a series of files. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'll call it lesson 07. And I'll create that, and I'll save my file in there. There we go. Okay, so I've got a completely blank slate here. Again, I'll just go over here and make some references. I think what we'll do is I'm just going to start to build the menu. Okay, so we can create these 4 main layers, and then we'll start on the menu layer with our content. So let's do that. So I'll rename that first default layer menu, and then create a new one directly above it. And we'll call this one pages. And then one above that I'll use for my frame labels, which is just kind of a formality. I could put my labels on my pages layer as well, but this just makes it more distinct. And then finally my layer for my code, which we call actions. Okay, and definitely save as I go here. All right, so I will start on that first frame in the layer called menu. Just going to use my rectangle tool, and I'll find sort of a warm yellow here, and I'll put a black stroke on it. And I'll just draw what will eventually be one common button. I'm going to use one button, and I'll use different text to go over them all. And I believe my stroke is set at 2, so I'm going to keep it at 2 and just make this sort of big enough here to accommodate a word. Okay, so right now that's just a raw vector graphic. I've double clicked it to highlight it. I'm going to convert that to a button right away. That would be modify, convert to symbol. Make sure you choose button. And I'm just going to call it yellow button. Yellow underscore button. That's the name that it will take on in the library. And click OK. And I'm saving as I go. Okay, so the idea is that the menu is going to be inside of a movie clip. And it's going to be a series of buttons inside the movie clip. So what I propose to do next is to take this button and convert it to a movie clip, which is really like saying embed the button in a movie clip. And that's where most of that work will take place after that. So with it selected, again, it's currently a button. I'm going to go modify, convert to symbol, and choose movie clip. And I'll just call the movie clip menu. Okay, again, what this does is it takes the selected content and wraps it inside of the container, which is a movie clip. It's a movie in a movie. There we go. It doesn't look any different, but if I select it on the stage, you'll see that's a movie clip. So I'm going to double click that to get inside of that movie clip, and that's where, again, all of the menu building will take place, including the code. So I'll double click that, and again, it seems to look the same, but if you look up here, we are inside of the menu now, which sits inside of scene 1. So with that, it's going to be a 2-frame system. So I'm just going to name this layer buttons. Okay. And I guess I can put a text element on top of this button. So I'll go to my text tool. I'm just going to click down here to start. And it's going to use the fonts I previously used. I see it set to Arial Bold, which is fine. Menu. The size is probably going to be okay too, but I may change it. I'm going to highlight that though and change it from yellow to black. And then put it over top of the yellow box. Now another thing actually to take note with that text is to make sure it's set on static text. Okay. Now you can drag that over a button, no problem. And I can make it bigger. I think I'll make it a little bigger. I'll select the whole thing here and just slide this up to maybe 22 or 24. 24 looks good. Just reposition that a bit. And you can use your arrow keys to nudge things around. There we go. Okay, I should save again here. Now I also want to have a mouse over feature for my button, but I want to point out that the text is not part of the button. It's just sitting on top of the button. Okay, so to get into my button, I'm going to move outside of where that text is and double click my button. I probably should have done this first, but it's not a big deal. And I'm going to create an overstate for it by going to the overstate frame, keyframing it with an F6 on the keyboard, selecting the graphic on the stage, and I'm just going to do a fill color change. I'll just make it get a little darker, a little bit more orange. So it's going to go from this to this. It's subtle, but you'll notice it. Okay, and that's it for the button. So I'm going to get out of the button, go back to the menu. I can either click on menu or the arrow back. So I'll click on menu. Again, I'm going to save. Command S on the Mac, Control S on the PC. And I'm pretty well done with what's going to be in frame 1. So I'm going to build frame 2 now, which has all of the submenu elements. Okay, so let's go to frame 2 and keyframe that. So that's again F6 on the keyboard. And with all of this still selected, I'm going to option click on the Mac, alt click on the PC to duplicate this button as well as the text that was on top of it. Now I'm going to do the same downwards. Again, select, let me undo that. It looks like I accidentally came out of it. Let me double click to go back in there. I think I had I hit a shortcut by accident. Anyway, I'm back on frame 2 just to make sure. I want to duplicate this button and the text on top of it by alt click and dragging downwards. And if you might want to hold your shift key to constrain it. But I think my snapping is on here. One more time, alt click and drag, duplicate that, and there we go. So I'm going to change the text on all of these. I may reduce it in size as well, but I'll start by calling this one home. And this one I'll call, I will reduce it just for artistic purposes. I'll bring it down to 18. Okay, and I will nudge that with my arrow key there. Looks like I had this one selected as well. So I'm going to change all three of these to 18 by selecting it and then just dragging this. You can change it by typing it as well. And again, with my selection tool, my arrow tool, select it. I can use my arrows to nudge it. I'm going to put a capital on the beginning of that. Actually, I want to change the whole word. This one I want it to be page 2. Okay. And the third one, again, I'll change the size. And I'm just going to say web link. Web link. Okay, and again, I'll go to my selection tool. I can just drag it around or nudge it around with my arrow keys. Definitely want to save that. Okay, so that's most of page 2. There's actually one more button to do. Believe it or not, it's going to be an invisible button. It will be when I exit these button areas, I have to basically cross the threshold, if you will. My mouse has to go in any one of these directions. So I'm going to put a button that is like a big body of water around this island. And there's no escaping without crossing that water. So I will put it on this layer as well. I'm going to go with my rectangle tool. I think I'll just turn off the stroke. And just to make this easier to understand, I'm going to just make it red. But the color is completely irrelevant. It's about the shape and the location. So I'm going to start by dragging here. And what I want to do is just overlap and block in the yellow buttons. So there's no white escape route, if you will. So the cursor is going to have to cross over what we see as red to get off the island. So that's step 1. I'm going to turn that into a button. Then I'm going to show you how you can make it what's called an invisible button. Start by selecting it. Modify, convert to symbol. Make sure you choose button, very importantly. I'm just going to name this one invisible. And that's how it will appear in the library. Invisible. Okay. Now to make it invisible, I'm going to double click on that swatch, which is the button. So you see here, I'm inside of a button, inside of the menu on scene 1. Coming down to the button timeline, as you know, we have the 4 separate states: up, over, down, and hit. To make this an invisible button, we will drag all of the content from the up state to the hit state. So the up state will then be empty and only the hit state will have a shape in it. So I'm going to click this and just pause for a second and then drag it to the hit state. So it should leave an empty span across here and the little black dot should be over here. And if we get out of the button, you'll know that it's invisible because it will now appear aqua. And it's appearing aqua because it's telling you where the hit zone is, but there is no actual content. So on playback, the user will not see this aqua area. It's ultimately going to be an invisible button. Okay, but that's what makes an invisible button. And again, I should save. So there's all of our buttons. Now, in order to communicate with the code, a button needs to have an identification. So we're going to go around, and I'll start back on frame 1, and we're going to give what's called an instance name. You see up here, there's a little box for instance name. We're going to create an instance name for each and every button. This will allow us to communicate with those buttons through the code. So let's go back to frame 1. Again, we're still in the menu, right? We're still in the movie clip called menu. Select the yellow button. Do not select the text for this. Select the yellow button and apply an instance name. I'm just going to call this menu underscore BTN. So I'm using underscore BTN at the end of each button name. So that's the only one on frame 1. Let's go to frame 2. Move my playhead. In this case, I probably don't even need to have it engaged. So I'm going to forget about the menu button and I'll address these buttons. So I've clicked on the button behind home. and I'll name it accordingly, home underscore btn. Then I'll select the next one down. Now we shouldn't use spaces, but I will call it page 2 underscore btn. Hit my enter key. And the third one, I'm just going to use a short version. I'll call it web. All lowercase underscore bt. Oh, hang on a second there. btn. There we go. And definitely saving on the keyboard here. Now there's one more button, very critical one. It's the invisible button. So select that button, and I'll just call it by its name, invisible and underscore btn. Command S to save on the Mac, Control S to save on the PC. So I've done a lot of the head work, if you will, anticipating some programming. I'm going to leave it like that for now. And I think we'll come back out to scene 1 and set up scene 1. So we won't literally put any programming in until we build the rest of the site. But we did a lot of heavy lifting here with the menu. Again, I'll show you. At its default, it's going to look like that. And ultimately, when we mouse over that box, it's going to expose these 3 buttons where this will be invisible. And when we exit the menu area and mouse over that green area, it will send us back to frame 1 inside of that movie clip. Okay, so let's go back to the top, to the parent, if you will, scene 1. What I want to do here is I'm just going to span them over, I'll say 20 frames, so just be easy to see what I'm doing. And I can do that by clicking down and dragging and hitting F5. Okay, and I'm saving pretty well every step here. You'll also notice that there's only content in the menu layer so far. Okay, so at this point we're going to address the pages layer, and I'm just going to put 2 big text elements in so that we can actually see that we have switched pages. Otherwise, the common white background would make it impossible to know if we're switching pages. Okay, so we're going to change the content, in other words. So I'm going to start on frame 1, move my playhead to frame 1, and click that first frame in pages. And I'll just go with my text tool, and I'm just going to click in the bottom here, and I'll just call this one home. But I'm going to make it really big. So I'll double click it to select it, and just drag here, and just use my selection tool to move it. Okay, maybe I'll just make it a softer color. Orange. All right. So there's my home button. So that tells me that my playhead is on frame 1. Again, I'm saving. Now I'm just going to go over to frame 5. And really I can probably delete most of these frames after that. But let's just go over to frame 5 by moving the playhead. Selecting the frame in the pages layer on frame 5. Making it a keyframe by clicking F6 on the keyboard. And at this point it is separated from this keyframe, so I can edit this text and it will only change in this keyframe. So we'll call this one page 2. Okay, and save. So now I have 2 pages right here and right here. You know, as we created instance names for the buttons, we have to do a similar thing for the timeline with respect to navigating to specific frames. So there's a thing called a frame label, and it attaches to a keyframe. So I'm just going to have 2. I'm going to have like the home page and page 2. So let's again move our playhead back to frame 1. And that layer called frame labels is just for that. I'm going to highlight frame 1 here. And over in my properties, under label, I'm going to call it PG01, page 1. Actually, you know what? I'll be more explicit. I'll just call it home. All lowercase, home. Then I'm going to move my playhead in alignment with this keyframe and select the keyframe here and add page 2, no spaces. So that's the names. Those are, oh, actually I put it in the wrong place. Sorry about that. Let me undo a couple steps. You can do what I just did, but it's going to be a little cleaner having its own layer. So let me just select that frame. Actually, I'll deselect, move my playhead, select that frame, keyframe it, F6, and that's where I'll put my frame label. So one more time with feeling, page 2, enter, and save. So now I have a dedicated layer just for my frame labels. And I only have 2, one called home and one called page 2, and no spaces. Top layers for my actions. So if I was to run the movie now, my movie would be toggling between these two pages because the playhead keeps cycling forever. So, now speaking of that, I'm just going to clean this up here a bit. I'm going to put my playhead over here and go Shift F5, and that's how I can retract span frames. I just wanted to shorten that a bit. Okay, there we go. It can't go behind this frame. If I wanted to retract more, I'd have to move back more. But I'm just going to save that. And I will run the movie quick. Here we go. Control Enter. And this is what I'm talking about. So we got two things. We got the movie or the menu cycling, and we got the main timeline cycling. So we're going to have to put a stop to all of that. Just close that for now and come back and deal with that. So we're going to use the wizard today. What I want to do is in my main scene 1 timeline, I want to put a pause on frame 1. So I will move my playhead there and expressly select frame 1, then open up my actions. So it's a different way to apply code without having to write it. When you are in the actions panel, there is a button called Add Wizard, Add Using Wizard. So let's start just by clicking that, okay? I did put my playhead on frame 1 and applied or clicked on that first frame in my actions, and now I'm clicking Add Wizard. So here it's asked me, what do I want to do? All I want to do is stop the playhead from moving. So if you look down this list, there is a stop command. So we start with stop. Then it says, which timeline? This timeline. I click next, and it says, with this frame? Yes. Had I had buttons here with names, I would have seen them. But with this frame is exactly what I want. Finish and add. Okay? Because there are no buttons on this level. Remember, they are inside of the movie clip. So on the top level, the scene 1 timeline, the only code we're applying is a pause in frame 1, which is stopping at this frame. Let me save that, and we'll test that. Okay, so it is paused because I see it's no longer cycling through the different pages, but we need to do the same thing inside the menu. Okay, so let's just close that and come back here, and I can simply go Add Using Wizard again. And I'll say, actually, you know what? Let me hit cancel for a second there. I will go into the movie clip. So I'm double clicking on the movie clip. And if you look at the timeline, I'm now inside of the menu called Movie Clip. I will also actually, while I'm at it, add a layer from my actions in here. Actions. I was just getting ahead of myself a little bit there. And I will keyframe both frames. There's going to be different code in each. So let me just hit my F6 on that second keyframe there in that layer. Okay, I'm just saving this. So I have a new layer called Actions. And I'm going to go to frame 1 and select the first frame. So now that I'm inside the movie clip, what I wish to do is I want to trigger the playhead to go and stop here on frame 2 when my mouse goes over this yellow button. Okay, let me just double check on the yellow button itself. And you see how it has an instance name. I'm just pointing that out here. Okay, so I will again click on that first frame in my actions layer. That's where the code's going to end up. And I'll start by clicking Add Using Wizard. Add Using Wizard. And what do I wish to do? I wish to go to a frame label and stop. So you know what? Let me cancel this again and add one more layer for frame labels. You can use numbers, but I found that it's a little friendlier with frame labels. So I'm going to select this frame as well and keyframe it. F6. I'm going to hide my actions for a second here. And I'll put a label on each of these. So I'll go back to first frame and I'll name that layer Frame Labels. Okay, and on the first frame, I'll select the first frame here and I'll call it Menu 1. Okay, and then on the second keyframe in that layer called Frame Labels, I will select the keyframe and name it Menu 2. Okay, this is just going to make it a little easier when I use the wizard. Okay, save it. Back to frame 1. Select that first keyframe in my actions layer. Call up my actions panel and start again. Add using wizard. And again, it asks me, what do I intend to do? I intend to go to a frame label and stop, which is right here. So I click that once and it says on this timeline, and I'll say yes. And here it's asking me to enter the name of the label. So it's menu 2 that I wish to go to. And then I click next. And it's saying, how do you want to create that action? I'm going to say on mouse over. Not mouse click, but mouse over. And then it says which button, and it would show me a list if there were others. But it's the only one on this frame, menu button. And then I say finish and add. I'm going to save that. I'm actually going to test that. Okay, here we go. Oh yes, I still need to put the stop in. That code is good that I did, but I need to put the stop in. So let's just try that again. I'll go to my timeline, select that frame, go to add using wizard, and I'll add the stop request. Stop this timeline next with this frame. Finish and add. Save it and test it again. That's why you should test every time you apply code. Here I go again, Control Enter. Okay, I've stopped the cycling. Now comes the real test. If I mouse over, it did go to frame 2. Now I haven't done a mouse back yet, but it's totally working here. So let's continue with that. So I'll do the equivalent now on frame 2, where if you mouse over, let me move my playhead to frame 2. If you mouse over this green button, which is called invisible _btn, it'll send us back to the frame label called menu 1, which is over here. So once again, I will select the frame 2 keyframe in my actions layer and go add using wizard. Same request, go to frame label and stop. Yes, on this timeline. Name the label, menu 1. Click next. I want to engage that on a mouse over as well. And now it's asking me which button. Invisible _btn. Finish and add. Save it. If it works, I will be able to open and close that menu basically. All right, so we menu on, roll over it, roll away, and it does disappear. Okay, and when it disappears, it's because I'm actually rolling over that invisible button. So there we go. We've got our toggling on and off. So now we're going to engage these 3 buttons next. So let's hop on back to Animate. And I'd like to see my timeline here. And I'm still, on this keyframe in my actions layer on layer 2. So let's address each of these buttons. Again, we start by using the wizard. What do I want to do? I want to go to a frame label and stop again. This one's going to be a little different though, but we'll start with go to frame label and stop. Now I will say this timeline, but ultimately I'm going to add a little code by hand to go to the parent's timeline. And the frame label on a parent's timeline that I wish to go to when I click the home button is actually called home. Okay, then I click next and I'll say with a click, on mouse click. Now which button? The home button. Finish and add. Now this won't work for the simple won't work yet for the simple reason that on this particular timeline I do not have a frame label called home. It happens to be on its parent's timeline up here, and there it is there. Okay, so let me go back to that code. So I need to add a modification. I need to go in between the word this, the dot here, and the go to and stop, and add the word parent. Then add a dot in between. So this dot parent dot go to and stop. Save that. Fingers crossed. Let's give it a test. Actually, I can't test it yet because I'm already on the home. So I'll do the next button. Like if I click it, I'm already there. Okay. But so we'll do the next button and we'll find out when we test the next button. Again, I'm still going to select that particular frame. Remember, I'm in my movie clip called Menu. And I will initiate the next button's actions with the Add Wizard. Again, go to Frame Label and stop. This timeline, I'm kind of lying in a way there, but I'll change the code by hand. And the other frame label was called Page 2 with no spaces. And then we click Next. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do it on a mouse click. And which button will we click? We'll click the button called Page 2 _ BTN. Finish and add. Save and test. Okay, so now Page 2. Okay, and it's not working, so I'm going to see why not. Oh yes, I didn't do the parent thing. Okay, that's the why not. I didn't do the parent thing. So let's go in here. Parent dot save, and as we say in the business, one more time with feeling, and test. There we go. And now I can click back to the home page. So I've got sort of two pages right now. And I know it's working because my giant text label is only on each unique keyframe. Okay, so now we'll deal with the web link. If I move away again, the submenu disappears. Okay, almost home on this. So add using wizard. Once again, actually I'll go to my timeline. Yeah, I still want it in that frame. Add using wizard. Nice easy one here, go to web page. Go to web page, type in the address. So I'm going to type in my address, https djolessons.com. Choose any website you want as long as it's a real one. djolessons.com, and I'll make sure I spell that properly. There we go. Then click next. And how do I want to do that? With a mouse click on mouse click, and it's when it clicks the web button called web _ BTN, finish and add. Save it, and here we go. If this works, we're good to go. All right, so there's the menu off and on, page 2, home page, and web link. And it did open a new browser window with that link. So there you have it, folks. How to create a menu system, an interactive menu system with a extended menu, if you will, a pop-up menu that will disappear when you roll away off the main menu button or any of the sub buttons even. And it navigates to internal locations as well as external locations. And that's what I'll have you build today, and then hand that in to Canvas.